We're back with another edition of Coffee and Climate Conversation with Dr. Marisa Gervais. You're an associate professor of meteorology and atmospheric science here at Penn State, and you specifically study climate dynamics. So tonight we're going to talk about the relationship of climate change and heavy precipitation. Now, earlier this year, Somerset County, Pennsylvania, in mid-May had a flooding event, and nearby Western Maryland had their worst flooding since 1996. Can we attribute these heavy rainfall events to climate change?
Well, so the first question we often like to ask is whether or not these types of events are truly abnormal. I think in this case, it's pretty clear that they are. We can identify this by either using a threshold, say if it's greater than 2 inches per day, that might be considered extreme in Pennsylvania, but maybe not in Arizona, right? Arizona would have a much lower threshold. We can also look at the percentile. If it's, if I were to have 100 days, the top day, that would be the first percentile. And also we can look at return periods. Is it a 1 in every 10-year storm or 1 in every 50-year on average? So we have different thresholds. I think in this case, these were pretty clearly extreme events.
Okay, so they're extreme events, but can we attribute them to climate change?
So that's a really key question, and it can be a little challenging to answer. So for a given weather event, we might still have that weather setup that can produce that event, but climate change can modify how likely it is, and it can also modify how much rainfall comes with that event. And so, there are ways to actually attribute individual events to climate change or look at the footprint of climate change on that event. But when it comes to extreme precip, what we can do is we can understand how climate change is impacting the frequency and the intensity of these events. So for example, when it comes to these heavy events, those first percentile events, there's an increase in 40% in the amount of rainfall associated with these over most of the Northeast and the Midwest. So over Pennsylvania, this event occurring now as opposed to earlier in the historical period would be 40% worse.
Oh, interesting. So why are these extreme precipitation events changing as the climate is changing?
So this is a really straightforward answer. So there's a principle called, or a relationship called the Clausius-Clapeyron relationship, where as the air temperature increases, as the atmosphere gets warmer, it's able to hold more moisture. So for every 1 degree Fahrenheit, we have a 4% increase in the amount of moisture we can hold. So if we have a parcel of air and it's more moist, we raise that parcel, more rain will fall out. And so that's a pretty simple first principles way to understand the impacts. And then in terms of what they look like, in general, we have this framework that we like to think about or we talk about where the pattern that we typically see is the wet get wetter and the dry get drier. So many regions that were already really wet will get wetter with climate change. And also individual storms will get stronger, have more rainfall associated with them as a result of climate change.
Okay, so let's bring this now back here home to Pennsylvania. And as you're well aware, agriculture is a big deal here across the Commonwealth. How are changes in extreme rainfall impacting agriculture here?
Well, so there's an old adage that rain makes grain. However, when it comes to extreme precipitation, extreme rainfall, this is not the case. So these can actually be pretty detrimental to agriculture. So when you have extreme precipitation or rainfall, this can lead to more soil and nutrient loss. It can lead to more disease occurrence, higher field wetness, and a loss of field work days. So this can be a net decrease in the productivity for agriculture, which is, really important, especially as we have more people to feed over time.
Mm-hmm. So now let's switch over to increased precipitation and its relationship to flooding. I'm assuming more heavier rain events will lead to more flooding. So what strategies are out there for addressing this problem?
Yeah, so this is something that really different cities and locales need to start thinking about. How do we fortify ourselves for these types of events that are going to become more common? So, for example, in Pittsburgh has a problem with wastewater where the wastewater and the stormwater go into the same place generally. And so oftentimes when you have these big heavy events, you can have sewage that's going, into basements, and that's
Not ideal.
not ideal, obviously. So they actually have a program to try to change and modify the infrastructure so that it can better handle this. And so when new projects are being built, large-scale projects, the idea is to build in strategies that change what kind of surfaces we're using. And then also in your own home, there are things that you can do. So using a rain barrel is a really great way to have some water available to water your plants and also reduce the amount that goes into the storm system. You can also plant trees. Having more trees and greenery is a way of making a surface that's, better able to capture that water. Also, if you're ever replacing pavers, you can actually install permeable pavers so the water can go into the soil instead of just running off. And also home composting is a good way of adding nutrients to the soil and making it more able to capture that water.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Marisa Gervais, Associate Professor of Meteorology and Atmospheric Science here at Penn State. We'll see you again soon, and we'll be back in a moment with more.